So good morning, everybody. It's Rachelle from Artful Leadership, and we're here live for another fabulous Artful Leader interview. So this interview series is really about tapping into the wisdom of folks who are leading in the arts, education, social change, healing, and really shifting the way that we do business in the world to really center our humanity and our healing and our wellness in all kinds of settings. And my work is really about supporting educators to impact young lives sustainably by putting their own well-being first, so that you can lead with a full tank, and so that you can also create a culture of community care that supports students and staff through changing times. And I'm really excited today because I've invited my dear friend Kathrin Keune from Germany, who is a fellow expressive arts coach and consultant, also working with organizations and leaders in the health and social service sector in Germany primarily. But I'm just so excited to have you here today to talk a little bit about, how using the arts can be such a powerful resource to leaders and teams in all kinds of settings. And just share a little bit about your work on that and my work on that, and kind of find our way through. And the folks that are watching in this group are a lot of leaders working in education, working with youth. But I feel like the principles that we want to dive into today are things that are applicable to anyone who's leading, and I think anyone who's working in an organizational setting. So thank you so much, Kathrin, for being here. Why don't you just introduce yourself and share a little bit about your work, how you got there, and what you're excited about right now with what you're doing.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here too. Thank you for having me. I've always wanted to say thank you for having me on the show. Yeah. So yes, my background, well, I try to make it brief. My first career was in musical theater and opera singing. So I come from the performance arts. And then I studied with Dr. Judith Greer-Essex in Westchester at the Expressive Arts Institute in San Diego. And this is also where we two met on the dance floor. Very, very good to meet people dancing. Actually, we can circle around that later. I've had a different experience with that, also at EGS. And I also studied at the European Graduate School, and it's now, I think, 12 or 13 years ago that I graduated from there. And I went directly into coaching because at the time I worked in a basic biology neuroscience research lab in San Diego when I lived there. And I realized that these scientists were brilliant people, but they kind of had, this was way back when, they had kind of limited social skills or team skills or things like that. And so I thought, oh, this is perfect. I know these two worlds, and let's get to it. Mm-hmm. And this is how I started my coaching career in San Diego. But when I moved back to Germany in 2011, I joined a consulting company, and they were really interested in building an arts-based department that did change management for big organizational development projects. And they really wanted me to implement arts-based processes in that, because they realized when we're working with people in change, with leaders and teams, it's very difficult to do it on paper only. Like, let's sit down and make a strategy and a plan, and then we just hand it over to the employees and they'll do it. Right. And so, of course, it doesn't work like that. And this is how I first got introduced into organizational consulting and things like that. And ever since, I've been really doing this on a very diverse spectrum, from individual coaching to trainings and seminars to doing, we call that OE, organizational development in Germany, different kinds of projects. Yeah. And I'm really excited about this work because, I know that our teacher, that Greer, used to say that a lot, that it never gets boring, because art making in and of itself provides such an unknown process. You know, you start something, you never know what will occur. You never know how the picture looks in the end, or the dance that you create, or the community art piece. And so it never becomes boring. I guess I think it's the best job to have to
Yeah.
work with art making. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so interesting and exciting. So what are some of the projects that you're working on right now? Like, just to give some examples of what kinds of teams or leaders or folks that you're working with.
Yeah. So I'm giving a lot of trainings and seminars at different universities for also science related students of different hierarchies. Sometimes they're already group leaders, having opened a lab and needing to learn, how to set up a team. How do we build a team culture? How do I deal with conflict when that arises? How can I talk to them what is okay to say and what is not okay to say? Things like that. I also have a lot of individual clients these days. They come to me with different questions. Some of them want to know something about career development and how to get promoted in certain ways. Others want to deal with anxiety and emotion. Just recently was coaching a young professor, and she got a career like soaring through the sky, like getting into all these different networks and communities and being recognized for her work and for who she is, and becoming the speaker here and the department representative there. And she got afraid of the success so fast, and she needed some, to make it short, some grounding of some sort, or some just pulling the handle a little bit and being being solid and feeling grounded in her work. Mm-hmm. So these are some things that I'm doing. The most exciting project is probably what I call the atelier. Mm-hmm. And this is something that came out of my consulting work. This is also the reason why I finished the consultancy work with that company, because I realized I was still too tied up in these projects that are all about, in the end, when you go as a consultant into a company, it's all about making the company better and making them more successful in money and budget and all of that. And I wasn't into that at all. I was into creating a culture where everyone would work with a meaning behind it and would find their identity with it, and would have an exchange of connection between teams and knowing why we're all here. Mm-hmm. And this is how I founded the atelier. And I thought, if I can change something in the world, let's look at the people who are in places of power. Mm-hmm. And if these people start to change, they can reach many others. Yeah. And so let's work with these ones. Mm-hmm. And this is how I started the atelier, calling on CEOs of companies in the health and social services sector. And so I built a group of 6 to 10 people, and they stay with me in the atelier over the course of a little bit longer than 2 years for 10 meetings. That means every 3 months, 4 months, we meet for a day and we make art. And reflect on our leadership behavior. Mm-hmm. And it's really, really fascinating what happens, how people start to change through this process. One thing doesn't make it. One meeting is a good impulse, right? It's a good, something stirs, they're excited, but it doesn't change the world. But if they stick with it and it keeps coming back, you can really see a development. And these developments are sometimes very personal. Like I had one very cool guy. He came from the industry into the social services sector because he had a company that caters to senior living, how do you call that? These senior living homes. They have these kitchens where in Germany you can cater to these kitchens and provide already half cooked food or something like that. So he was the CEO of that company, and very innovative, visionary man. But one of his big things was he was growing older. He was beyond 60, and that was a that changed his image of himself, and he needed to find a new place of how he could do his business and be a representative of his company as an older person now, but still being vivid. And one day when this 10 meeting process was over, one of his final performances was a man in a hat like this. How do you call these? A cylinder?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, these big hats, that men at the turn of the century were wearing, these black hats.
Yeah, a top hat.
Yeah, a top hat.
Mm-hmm.
And he performed a theater thing and something like, I'm an old man now, and I'm very satisfied with who I am. And I made, I crossed the bridge into aging with dignity or something. And even though it was a theatrical, imaginative thing, I felt that there was, something in it for them that was really realistic and that he took from the stage into his life.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah.
That's really lovely. And before we went live on the call, we were talking about, why art? Like, why would processes and experiences in the arts and various kinds of rituals or play, like, why would that be so useful to folks in a professional setting? And I love what you just hit upon, and that is that I feel like we've created this culture where we've compartmentalized so many things, right? And our identity and our culture and our personal lives and our relationships and all these things are sort of like severed from this role that we play in a professional setting. And when we have these like more traditional professional development experience or whatever, they come in, it's very transactional. It's very like, here's the method and boom, boom, boom. But the arts allow us to kind of cross into these rich explorations of identity, of relationships, of inspiration, and of things that are a lot further sort of under the surface, that are the thing that drives us. And like what you were saying, your passion was about connecting people to their purpose and to their relationships with one another. And like, why are we here? What's the point? And that's so what I'm passionate about too as a consultant. And so in these explorations of identity and experience allow us to be human in these professional settings and see each other as humans. And you were telling me a story about what happened with this group you've been working with when the time was over, they didn't want it to end. So share a little bit about like how meaningful those experiences are to folks in these processes.
Yeah. I want to first say a couple things about why art making.
Yeah.
I think when you really go and teach certain models, or this is how you should have a conversation, you first open with this sentence, then you go to that sentence, and you finish with that idea. That is, to me, very mechanical and very mechanistic in a way. It's like a machine, one thing follows another. But we all know that life and people are not as predictable and as functional as that. We're much more organic.
Yeah.
And what do you do then? Now you have your little grid here and it doesn't apply to the situation. So working with the arts really provides for an organic response to whatever is. And that's what we're training with art making. And in that sense, it really provides a playground for people to test and to try and to examine and to explore and to not risk too much. Nothing will happen if in the end the thing that you drew is not a Picasso. Right. But in management, if you don't hit the grid or you don't do it right, there are consequences.
Yeah.
So it's a good playground to test and really get your organic thinking going. And so with the group that I was working with, we just came off another meeting with them last week, Thursday and Friday, and I did it in nature on a farmhouse somewhere in nowhere in Germany. And I had them stay outside with me the whole time. It was raining, it was cold, it was sunny, it was windy, it was rainy again. And so I told them, we're going to be outside, so you better be prepared with clothes and everything. And the whole topic was rhythm. Like, how do I find my own rhythm? And there's this big metaphor, even in nature and in leadership, on rhythm. I think we as human beings are underlying several different rhythms, of life and death, of sleep and awake, of hungry and not hungry, and all of these things. They're rhythms. There are certain things that are reoccurring, and so is nature. And so working in nature, our topic was to recreate or experience what can I learn from the rhythm that I'm observing around me, and what is my own sense of rhythm. And that's very different than meter or tact, right? And management and leadership is often seen as this tact. We get things done, we have to reach a goal, we follow a certain structure. But we as human beings aren't like that mechanistic thing. We work more circular and and so that was a really sweet thing. And connecting them back to nature and just being outside was very, very good to experience what is that rhythm. And one of them said, there's no other group that I know of and no other place amongst other managers where I can be so close to my tears and where I can see my other fellow colleagues here being so moved and so openly moved by their emotions. And that felt, and he's like, that is very important. I don't need that every day, but I need it regularly. And it's important for me to have that. And so that was very touching. And when he went back, he told his secretary and his assistant about all of the things. They're very careful with sharing too much, because a manager, who's making art and who's dancing and playing on instruments and all of that, I mean, would you share that? So they're very careful with that, but sometimes they let out little things here and there, and it creates interest in the people who are listening to it. So I was asked to expand and, offer an atelier on a different for secretaries and assistants, because they're like, we're bored by these regular seminars and trainings where you get your XYZ models. We want to really explore and feel ourselves. And we have this whole notion in expressive arts of embodiment, right? Where we're tapping into experiencing and understanding, thinking of the world through our whole body, not only through the rational, pure thought that was once established way back when through philosophy.
Right, as like the highest form of consciousness or something, right?
And that goes over any primitive sensation that you have in your body. If we want to be good managers, we have to have good thoughts.
Right. When we're actually in relationship with humans who are experiencing life in all these rich ways, and especially right now, everyone's experiencing a lot of various stressors. People are dealing with a lot of stress with this pandemic and all that it has entailed. And so I feel like this past year and a half has just kind of like thrown all of that out, right? Like, we can't just show up with our little program of what everything is supposed to look like, because we don't know on a day-to-day basis where things are going. And so those relationships that we have with one another and those ways of being that we sort of inhabit in our bodies are going to be the most important for whatever business we're involved in or whatever field that we're involved in. Because everything else is up in the air. So it's like, it's time to ground into those relationships and into those true connections, and in tapping into those ways of being that connect us to others and make meaning, right?
And more so, or next to it, not only relationship with others, but relationship with myself.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. If I don't understand what's going on with me and why I feel this or that, stressed or relaxed or in conflict with a person, then how can I respond adequately and productively to this environment? And so this is really what's been happening with these CEOs in the atelier, that they realized, I cannot be a good manager if I'm not really in contact with my own feelings, my own needs and worries and fears and sensations and wishes and dreams and all of that. And even though, of course, not everything plays into my day-to-day business, it informs my choices and my decisions.
Yeah.
And knowing that makes it much more easier to be authentic and to build a relationship with my employees that is rooted in authenticity and in really in meaning. It's not a superficial, oh, let's just do something here, whatever it is. Right. But it becomes meaningful. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so interesting because I know as a coach, like in my training, in a business setting outside of like the expressive arts training that I have, there's been this drive to like create your framework, create your model, create your process that you take people through. But it's so interesting when I'm talking to organizations about what it is that they're really looking for from a coach like me, is they love working with someone who doesn't have a cookie cutter approach. And that there's a lot of that out there, and it serves its purpose, and it has its outcomes or whatever. But a lot of folks are saying, like, I don't want you to come in with this set of tools or this process that you walk us through, and then it's like, okay, figure it out, bye-bye. They're like, we want somebody who can really get into the thick of it with us and find out who are all the players and what's going on with them, and how do we prioritize wellness in this setting, and how do we really help people develop and step into their strengths and their passions so that this place really thrives. And I feel like the arts are just such a wonderful way to do that. And it's scary. It can be really scary for people because, as you said, like, there's a lot of unknowns. We don't know what's going to happen when we come together and draw this giant mandala together. We don't know what's going to happen when we engage in some improv play or, whatever. But that's when we get to something that's more true of who are the individuals that are actually in the room, rather than just running people through some rubric or some process that's already predetermined.
Yes, exactly. It's interesting that you talk about fear, because I realize when I get really good contracts in terms of organizational or team development, it's these brave people who have known or have experienced so far that what they've been doing isn't working. It doesn't make the shift and the change that they so desire. And so they realize, I have to take a risk. I have to risk that something in my company will show up that I'm not prepared for, that some people will respond harsher, more different than I ever expect. Am I willing to do that? And if they're willing to do that, with our support, and we give them the trust that no one will die, we will get through this, and we will only leave the company when it's settled. Right. Then the magic can really work, and it really depends on that. It very much depends on that. If the CEO is not ready to take that risk. I've done plenty of projects in my consultancy where I did extremely good work with the team. We would work out the conflicts amongst each other. We would do role plays in theater and all things with that. And we would come up with solutions, how to treat each other and how to communicate with each other, and respectful and, mindful and aware and all of that. And then we presented the results to the CEO, and they came in and they were like, well, that's besides the point. What we wanted to accomplish here is this strategic move forward, and that point. And wow, so all the good work was down the drain. And that's very disappointing. I mean, it's a big risk also for companies to fall apart at this point, because the employees stop trusting. Yeah. They have invested a lot and they have really gone for a cultural change, and then the CEO just smashes it away. Not so good. So I realize in Germany, the situation right now is that slowly, especially in the health and social services sector, with these, a lot of them are nonprofit or not-for-profit organizations. They're already value-based by what they're doing, right? Because they're providing services to elderly and to kids and to people with handicaps and disabilities. And so for them, it seems like it's easier
Yeah.
to look at culture and value-based leadership. For the industry and economy, it's sometimes more difficult. They haven't made the transition yet, but there's lots of new companies uprising that are really striving for that. And that's very hopeful, that we're coming into a world where business really becomes much more human and thus more meaningful and sustainable, and bringing wealth on all levels, not only money wise.
Right. Well, and I think that we've learned so much this year about what is really important to us, and I think, as we see all the things that are happening in the environment and with social justice and all these other things, I feel like we're really starting to see how important it is to shift the way that we do business and in all spaces, and that human wellness and the wellness of our planet are crucial to our future. And we can't just keep blazing on this hardcore sort of capitalist approach. Like it's killing people, it's killing the earth. And so, and I feel like those of us who are on this really looking at, walking through that change in a more heartfelt way, in a more connected way, I think can really lead a paradigm shift. In this way of working.
Yes. And I see this happening with these CEOs. They're starting to really come around to realize that, things like silence and not doing can be part of management. Isn't that exciting? Really, sometimes to not do, but to just be quiet and see which creative spark comes, if something comes. I find that thrilling.
Well, and to be more responsive to like who's in the space, what do they have to offer, what's emerging, I think can lead to really authentic and powerful changes in wherever we are, rather than some prescribed path. When things arise from the group of people there or from the clientele or whatever, I feel like something really, really meaningful can emerge from that.
Yes.
Yeah. So you also have this interesting project, Imaginegeist.
Yeah, I want to talk to you about that.
Yeah, tell us about that.
Talking about paradigm shift and all of that. Imaginegeist, I'm a part of that initiative, let's say that. I'm not, at the core, I'm at the extended core team, but this is an initiative, an offspring of European Graduate School. There's 3 ladies that have graduated this year, last year, and I don't know when. And they have said the following. They realized that, for the next generation to come, there are so many huge topics to tackle that concern us globally, such as climate change, migration, food and water supply, sustainability in business, and the textile cloth industry, all of these things. And it's very difficult to have a good conversation about that because there's a lot of judgment. There is a lot of predispositions of what is possible, what is not possible. So it's not really an open solution-oriented dialogue so much, but more like a closed up, this is what we do. And then, there are small little initiatives for something, but it's not a global solution. And so they've said, we want to provide arts-based research on these topics in 2 forms. We're going to have arts-based live groups that are meeting, like my atelier with the leaders, where we're talking and making art about these topics, about climate change, about business, leadership. And then we use the art that is being created in these groups and we digitalize them for an online platform where we provide them to the world. And then the world, let's say the public, anyone, you, me, grandpa, and my aunt, can interact with that also through digital art making. So the website is conceptualized in a way that you can engage with the content and really make something with it. And the idea is that by the end of this discourse, this conversation between different people between different expertises, there will be a perspective change. There will be hopefully new ideas, and in the best sense, maybe some great solutions and some great steps, that could be offered to policymakers or nonprofits or, whoever is then having the budget and the power to change something. And I think this is a wonderful idea, because the problem is how to have this discourse. How can we have an open, big dialogue that considers all kinds of different aspects and perspectives? How can we get these people on one table? And how can we do it in a way that is respectful and inclusive? And so I think art making is a wonderful way of exploring that, because it through a creative process, we have to be opened up. We cannot stay closed in our approach. So that is Imaginegeist. And we're just now, with the atelier that I just led, we collected our first arts-based research data from this live group, and that's been digitalized now. And then we have a prototype website that is not fully released yet, just to a few people. And so when we're out of the pilot phase, do you call it pilot phase? Like the initial trial and error phase, launching, I think, beginning of 2023. So there's a lot of technology still to be developed, and but that's the goal, and it's very exciting.
It is. And I love that it's high tech, it's accessible to people internationally who can, engage with this material and this content and this process on the internet, which is where it's happening these days, right?
Right. The world is digitalizing. I think, this is the beauty of it, that even though we cannot be in contact right now face to face, we still can have some sort of a connection. It feels a little different for sure, and yet it is a connection, and we can participate in each other's lives and in each other's doings. And I think this is the wonderful thing that happened in this whole pandemic, that this digitalization has just boom gone through the roof, and we've been connected.
That's so exciting. So I'm sure you all have a vision of like how you will be engaging people or promoting or inviting folks to, I'm sure that's part of the whole plan, but that'll be really interesting to see how you bring, folks to share their art and interact with, what's emerging from those reflections.
Right. That in and of itself, to digitalize the art, will be a creative process. Because when you have like a layman, like an art brut piece, that's not a Picasso, you cannot just put that online and then people be inspired by that, right? It takes some skill, as we know, to really look at lines and find something interesting in that. So we need to twist it and turn it into something so interesting that people can get fascinated by it. So, maybe the process of how the lines were created, or shades of it, or I don't know, that in and of itself is a creative process. I'm really looking forward to that.
That sounds exciting. So as we're kind of moving through this crazy time, what is your message to leaders in your sector, or folks that might be listening? Like, what do you want them to walk away from this conversation? Sort of, what would you like them to take away from your work and what you've learned?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is that through this pandemic, I think, as you said before, we've all realized what is important and what is not so important. And we've really realized that because we all have stopped running. We have stopped in that meter, that tacting. And we have sat down and stayed in our home office and not traveled as much. And so all of a sudden we had more time at our hands. More screen time. Okay, yes, that was the downside, but more time. And so the leaders that I've recently been working with, they've all said in unison that this time, this extra self-care that they could do through that, you know, some of them were just doing more sports, others were just using more family time, or just more downtime. They have experienced that as a very creative impulse and room for something else to emerge, for some new ideas, for some new energy, some new room for breath, really. And so I hope that this is something that leaders will now incorporate in their everyday life, that they realize management begins with self-management. And I'm responsible for myself, for my own self-care, for how I deal with myself so that I can encounter my company, my team, the world that I want to make business in. And that is not trivial. That is essential, I think, to good leadership. And art making always provides something like that, you know, doing a little doodle or writing a little journal or sitting down and just listening to the symphony of the world are all little things that can be easily done, that don't require time, but that provide that breath and that space to get into an organic rhythm and not a meter that is very mechanistic and mechanical.
Yeah, so important, so important. So what is when it's time for you to kind of take care of yourself, what are your primary go-tos when it comes to really nourishing yourself as a practitioner and as a woman in this crazy world?
Yeah. Well, there's two departments kind of that I try to look at. One department is that I have a lot of interaction with colleagues and friends in a sort of supervision and intervision, where I really get also input on how to do certain things. And I have several different people, you know, one supervisor for that process, my general supervisor for my general work, and then some friends that are also in positions like mine to talk about this. So that's really wonderful, and that helps me. And in terms of self-care, I love to sing. I still do, because I'm sometimes still performing. So I'm right now working on a new aria, one of these big ones, you know, from Barbier of Seville, one of these. So that's a good thing for me to improvise and practice with my voice. Another thing is to maintain a visual journal. I've just recently discovered that through a course by Pamela Underwood. She made a visual journal, Living with Images, I think it's called. And I realized how great that is when you're beyond the concept of language, right? Because language always conceptualizes things, reduces experiences to one word. But when you're just starting to draw and to collage and to use colors, how much that really opens a world. And so I catch myself by opening up my journal and just, you know, doodling and scribbling and not liking the image so much, but the process itself is so satisfying. And I always get in touch with things that I don't see, that I don't realize as I'm working through my life. You know, how do I really feel, and what's going on, and how's my energy level and my inspiration and all of these things. I can't grasp them before I do this.
Yeah,
that's really the interesting part. It doesn't come, I can't sit down and be like, okay, so let's think about this now. What is my awareness level and how do I really feel? I can do this to a limited extent, but when I start doodling around and maybe moving in my chair as I do this, there is more information that I get. And that is so satisfying. And I think this is really what these leaders are experiencing when they come to my work or come to our work and make art. They can't really, I think we cannot rationalize it right away, but we feel something is different. There's a more organic something, and there's a different perspective that happens, and it feels also kind of good. And so I hope that from this pandemic we really take better care of ourselves, and we take ourselves seriously in that, and we make time for that, and we risk doodling and scribbling and singing and dancing and doing these things, because they create for a holistic experience of life.
Yeah.
Not a rationalized thinking version only.
Yeah. Mic drop.
Yoo-hoo!
Yeah, well, thank you so much for sharing a little bit about your work. And it's so inspiring to me as I'm kind of embarking on doing this work myself in a new way. And I hope for those who are listening that you take away some nuggets about how important it is to slow down, to pause, to take time to check in with the senses and the imagination and play and get that relationship with yourself on board so that you can be in relationship with others in a more meaningful and profound way. So thank you so much for sharing with us. I hope that we stay connected and continue to learn and inspire each other through this.
Yes, I hope so too.
Making this shift in how we do things. It's really important. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's
very lovely to see you. Thank you so much. It was a fest to talk to you.
Yay. And one day we will dance on the dance floor again. I have wonderful memories of dancing with you in South State.
Right. Yes, me too. All right.
Well, have a great night and we will connect again soon. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye, Rachelle.
Bye.